Okay, I'll call the meeting to order at 7:08. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Allred,
Here?
Mr. Andreessen,
Here.
Mr. Fell,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins,
Here.
Ms. McFarland, Mr. Rose,
Here.
Ms. Sims, and Ms. Yu.
Here.
Okay, so it looks like we have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none.
Any communications?
There are none.
Okay, audience participation. Our one member of the audience. Just want to ask, are you here to give comment about the conference plan or just to listen or? Okay, cool. So I was going to say, if you wanted to give comment on the plan, I'd ask you to wait and we'll provide time during the study session. So if you do want to eventually give comment. Yes, yeah, I hope so. Okay, so that brings us to the study session. So first off, I want to thank staff for all the work that they've done putting together the draft that we've been reviewing. I also want to thank all of the commissioners for setting aside time to attend this special session that's out of our normally scheduled Plan Commission meetings. So we have a draft. We have an early draft of the comp plan that I think needs some work. And rather than just start talking about reactions to the plan, I want to try and structure the discussion initially. So let me explain how I would like to structure the study session. So to me, the draft has a couple issues. It has issues both with key content that I think is missing, as well as some issues or potential issues with how it's organized. Particularly when we think about how we use the plan, how we as the Plan Commission use the comprehensive plan in the work that we do. So it's that use of the plan that I think would be useful as a way to get us, start us thinking about the draft plan that we have. So first off, I want to start us off thinking about uses of the plan, how it will be used by us, but not just by us, by all potential users within a community, from residents to business owners to developers, landowners. Using that sort of discussion or that brainstorming kind of session to think about what's missing from the draft in terms of content. So what needs to be in the plan so that it can be useful for these different users, for these different stakeholders. And then maybe how the structure or the organization of the plan may also need to change as a result of that sort of discussion. After that, so hopefully we'll spend some time discussing that. After that, I want to give some time just to hear sort of general reactions in terms of your first look at the draft. This can be, comments or thoughts on how it's framed, the themes that are included, content, whatever else that comes up. Then, if our member of the public by that point has decided that you want to provide some comment, we'll provide some opportunity, if anyone else comes in the meantime, for the public to provide some comment on the draft or on the discussion that they've heard. So that's the agenda. That's how I want to structure this otherwise rather open-ended study session. So to get us going on this first point, thinking about how the plan is used and how that might suggest certain things that need to be in the plan that maybe aren't or aren't fully developed, I've asked staff to brainstorm potential users of the comp plan across several categories. And we talked about these categories, and I'm not sure if this is what they ended up doing, but we talked about this potential categories as planners, so staff, other city staff, right? So we have Public Works in the room, we have someone from grants, so other users within the city of the comprehensive plan. To include us, commissions and elected officials, And then the development community as a third sort of category, and finally, residents and the business community. So, staff, you want to take over? Does anyone want a PDF for tonight's discussion? Yes. There's a couple takers over here, maybe 3 takers.
Oops, thanks for letting us get started. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Carol Mitten. I'm the city administrator. So I'd like to do a little introduction too, because I've been there, I've been with the city, and I was there at sort of the germinating of the ideas of what we wanted this comprehensive plan to look at. And I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Dustin and Lou a week or so ago. And one of the things Lou said was, don't just make plans, use plans. And, or that's the goal, right? So I have to say, and all of you might not be aware of it, but one of the hallmarks of Mayor Marlin's 2 terms has been using plans to lay a foundation for action. And we have seen that, I mean, in the early days before I even joined the city, there was the What's in Your Square exercise, which was, it was the beginning of a plan, right? It was just the brainstorming part of it, but it was to get people excited about possibilities at the beginning of her administration. And then we have done things like the facilities master plan, which is focused on the city's buildings and so forth, but the whole idea is to do a plan that leads to implementation. And we've done that with, we undertook understanding one of the most important assets we have besides the people that work here and live here, and that's our streets. And so we undertook a comprehensive pavement condition index analysis, which then fed into a newly revitalized and much more transparent capital improvement plan, which we are very diligently implementing at a rate and in a way that we have not been able to in the past. We've done things like the stormwater asset management plan, and we have other infrastructure-related plans in the works. So we agree. That has been an intention of this all along, that it be realistic and that that the comprehensive plan is something that we can implement. So the idea for us as staff, and that's why you see people from different departments here, is this is supposed to be an overarching policy document that guides all of what I would say is place-based activity on the part of the city. And that's across different departments. It could be place-based because it's economic development, or it could be place-based because it's infrastructure. But we want one place where all that happens. We had a couple, so that's part of it. Then we've had a couple of big activities that have taken place where we've tried to collect information citywide to inform sort of priority setting. And a big one was mayor-council goals. That's something, the way that we're doing it now is quite different than the way it's been done in the past. It's much more narrow, and it's focused on 4 main areas. That's something that we also did a similar exercise to decide how we were going to spend our ARPA funding. And we went out to the public and we said, what are your priorities? And so we started seeing patterns. If we had had a new, fresh, comprehensive plan, we would have known what our priorities were. So that's the idea, is when these kinds of opportunities come up, we should have something to build off of as opposed to something that is out of date. So there's a couple of values that we've tried to bring to the plan that you have in front of you. And we acknowledge this is the beginning of our collaboration on this, but I want you to know this is intended to be something that's used by, and you'll see an actual list in a minute, but many different stakeholders, and Dustin articulated who some of those people or groups would be. But one of the things that really meant a lot to us, means a lot to us, is that this plan is authentic to the city of Urbana. It's not like anything else. It will not be like anything else. And that's why there's been a lot of public outreach. There's been a lot of kind of toggling back and forth between the input we've gotten from the public and staff, because we want this to be as authentic as we can make it. We want it to reflect the values of the broadest set of values of the community. And that's why it was so important to go to the people who don't usually show up here. We wanted it to have a realistic sense of where we are starting, and that's why the Examine Urbana tour de force of Lily Wilcock is so important. It's because it tells the story of who we are today. And it is something that we refer to when people want to understand Urbana. If we have hired new senior staff, we say, look at that. Sometimes I was working with a group of students, which is not something I typically do, and I made reference to the development and taxes section of Examine Urbana. To me, that's the most important one. But it's a reference document for us. It is authentic. And it tells the story of where we are starting. We also wanted to have a realistic sense of what can be accomplished during the projection period. So this is intended to be a 10 to 20 year plan. This is not thinking big thoughts 50 years, 100 years in the future. So that is constraining because there's only certain things that you can accomplish over that. And then it's not specifically, it doesn't have budgets associated with it, but in some sense it is resource constrained. There are priorities, other things are not included because we don't have the resources to accomplish that. So this is going to be a very important guide for city staff as we go forward. It will inform the comprehensive plan. It will inform some of the choices that we make. It will use it in a similar way to the Plan Commission, which is we have a decision to make. What information can we glean from the comprehensive plan about whether we should make this investment, whether we should approve this rezoning or whatever? So we think of it as an incredibly important tool for city staff and setting a direction going forward. And we know that based on the input that we've gotten from the people in the community, that this is authentic to the city. So I just wanted to tell you where we're coming from, and we're super excited for the conversation to finally get here. So please use us as a resource because it's not just about how we want it to be a useful document for you. We want it to be a useful document for us, and I know that through dialogue we can get there. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Dustin referred to the different users, and staff, we got together and came up with some uses. First of all, the users themselves, and Dustin covered that. The city planners having one group of users, other city staff, elected officials, and the commissions being a group of users. Developers, architects, and contractors as a third group, and then new and existing residents and businesses as a fourth group. And so we formalized just based on our experiences with those different groups about how they do use it. You know, the calls we get, the cases that are worked on, et cetera, how these different groups use that. So this is something, and I do have hard copies I'll pass around to everybody, and we'll cover that in a little more detail later. But I think that was a great outcome from the conversation that we had last week about, yes, this was a missing piece, and I think it helps people understand that it is such a broad-based document and why, because it does affect a lot of users. This slide, I think you've seen to some degree before. It's really just a refresher. Carol touched on some points. We really wanted to hear from voices that we don't normally hear from, and we did a very targeted effort to do that, going out into the different wards, hosting meetings, being at specific events in different wards so that we could reach those folks. So we published several reports. As you recall, we had a community engagement report from that first broad range of community engagement. We had another report that was from the Balancing Act, where spending priorities were identified. We also had the assessment of the 2005 report. That was something that, from an executive summary, if you read nothing, read the executive summary, it really brings out some good points about why different aspects of the plan didn't make it to fruition for various reasons, why some were successful. And one of the things we did learn more broadly was that if we didn't have action items associated with the different goals, oftentimes that was a reason that they didn't go forward. We didn't have specific action plans for those. This is just an update on the meetings that we've had where we've given different updates to Plan Commission, and I can give you a copy of these slides, of course. But just regular updates, as Carol mentioned, this has been an ongoing process. As we gather data, analyze data, then we would report on that data. And between the council and Plan Commission, we usually dovetailed. The city council would get the similar presentation that the Plan Commission received. But we came up, as you've now seen, because you've seen this first initial draft, we're calling the big idea, we're calling overarching goals the big ideas, and we're calling those strategic action items big moves, and then we have little moves to make sure that those happen. And then, of course, metrics. We wouldn't be anywhere if we couldn't measure where we're at now, where we're going to go, what we accomplished. So we spent a lot of time on creating metrics for that as well. So these are the reports I just mentioned. Examine Urbana, Carol went into detail on that. That would be similar to a existing conditions area in a plan commission, or in a comprehensive plan. We're calling it Examine Urbana. I think it was a very in-depth look at where we're at today, and it's been a useful tool. These different documents are in the appendices, and the appendices, I printed a copy today of that. I think it's over 300 pages are appendices for all of the documents that we have in there. So we started with the information release. That happened on August 14th. We have a distribution list for all communications that come from the city, an internal list and an external list. The internal list has boards and commissions, stakeholders, et cetera, in addition to staff and others. We also sent it to the neighborhood groups that we had been working with all along in the comprehensive plan. And we've already heard from several of them. When I sent it out, they copied me on communications that they made to their neighborhood groups. So getting those groups to stay involved is really important. We sent a postcard out. This is a copy of the postcard. Hopefully all of you should have gotten one. They went to over 21,000 households in Urbana. And we're going to play on that same theme in some of the advertising. So we're trying to get people to attend public meetings, the Plan Commission meetings. The study session was announced as well, but ongoing meetings that the public has an opportunity to keep giving us feedback. So we are also in social media. The city has several social media platforms that are used. Smile Politely, the News Gazette online edition, we're going to be in that. We'll also have some print advertising too that's happening on the 30th. So these are the informal meetings that have been scheduled. We really do want them to be informal. We're not going to give a presentation. People will come in and have the opportunity to give us feedback if they've already read it. If they have not, we're going to have various things in the room, sort of like a poster session where they can see some of the more important aspects of the plan and start to give us feedback on that. And those meetings are held throughout Urbana. They're not necessarily ward meetings, though we did try to make sure every ward could be represented, but it's a broader, anybody can go to anyone, they can go to multiple ones, and we hope that they do so. And then public meetings coming up, Plan Commission, these are all tentative dates. In fact, that got dropped, I'm sorry. All of these are or these are the actual dates, I'm sorry, tentative dates are on the next slide, but Plan Commission discussions are going to happen here at least through probably October 17th, if not longer. Arts and Culture, we're making a presentation, the BPAC Committee, the Sustainability Commission, and also we're going to be in Community Development. Braden and I were just trying to set a date for that, so it hasn't been set yet, but we want to make sure all of our commissions are on board. And then the tentative dates I mentioned, Plan Commission, eventually, this is the process that we'll follow, is that Plan Commission will make a recommendation to the Committee of the Whole at some point. Those dates are yet to be determined. We've got some placeholder dates out there. Then it'll go, as I mentioned, to the City of the Whole discussion. They may have one meeting, they may have 2 or 3. That'll be just based on the type of discussion that takes place. And then eventually, it'll get recommended for the City Council to vote on its approval and adoption. Anyway, that's just a quick overview of the process that we've been through, and we can spend more time. Carol, do you have some more comments?
No, I was just going to say, maybe put the user slide back up.
Okay. And so Kevin has hard copies of that user slide. If you want to pass those out, just so everybody has that in front of them, they can make notes. But I think this is a good discussion document to start with, Dustin,
yeah.
if that's your
Great.
prerogative.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together about the users and then giving us an update on the process. Are there any questions from the commission about anything that's been said so far? Where we go from here, I kind of want to bring this back around to what I would call this kind of first agenda item to, again, you can put up that slide about the users. So just to use, thinking about the various users and the way that they use the plan to think about, what the draft does well. I'm not trying to be overly negative. What the draft does well, what's in there that accomplishes or helps users accomplish what they're trying to use, but what also might, be highlighted as things that are missing. I think, most obviously of how the Plan Commission uses this and how planners use this, but certainly we have a variety of different stakeholders in the room that can talk about this. But I thought maybe it would be useful as a start to maybe put staff staff in the spotlight. Ask Kevin maybe to just go through quickly how staff uses the comp plan, for example, to write a staff report when they are say, reviewing something like a rezoning or a PUD, and maybe walk us through where that information is in the draft comprehensive plan, because I think we're familiar with what this looks like, in terms of how information is used in the 2005 plan, but maybe not so much in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, so typically, say we have a rezoning case come in, we'll look to our future land use map that's in the plan, see whether the proposal to rezone a property is going to sort of jive with what the future land use map says, and our current future land use map, which is something we need to flesh out a little more in the version we're putting together now, is sort of it also has annotations and things, so it'll give you more detail than just, say, a future land use designation. So we look to that map to see how things fit in with that. We also will look into the goals and objectives from the comprehensive plan, which I'd say one of the limitations of the current plan is it's got a lot of things in there. So I find it hard to not find things that almost every proposal we ever get could, you can pick out things from the plan, and maybe that's okay. But so you look to those specific things to see how well a proposal jives with that.
Can I interrupt for a second? So
Yeah.
Andrea mentioned this, but just to be clear, how exactly does the way that it's organized as the big ideas, big moves, little moves, how does that map onto goals and objectives and action items?
Yeah, so big ideas are like the overarching goals of the plan. The big moves are then sort of the objectives, and then little moves are the action steps to meet those objectives.
Okay, so we only have 4 goals then? Is that,
That's correct.
okay?
Yeah. So 4 big ideas. And I mean, essentially, that's kind of how we use the plan just to process a case. It's it's pretty straightforward, and then we, of course, every case is different, so we evaluate other things besides just how well a proposal tracks with the comprehensive plan. But that's currently how we use the comp plan to look at cases that come in, and then. But of course, we use the comp plan for other things, like, if people want to if they say, hey, I want to do this thing in this place, then we go to the comp plan and see what it says about that. So it's not, it's not just a document we're using for cases, if that makes sense.
Is this generating any questions, or, is anything that you've, in your review of the draft comprehensive plan, raising alarms, or do you think that these things are in the plan to be able to do this? In this particular case, there's a long list of, other users here and how they might use it that we could get into as well, but I thought this might just be one place that we could start from. Mr. Rose.
Kevin, big move too is to revise the zoning ordinance to align with Imagine Urbana, and our work hinges greatly on the zoning ordinance. Could you elaborate perhaps on this? Elaborate. Is there a scope here that merits discussion?
Yeah, let me see if I can pick a good example. So, one example that comes to mind, because it's very much at top of mind for me often, is the B3U case that we just did, right? So that we had a future land use designation for a particular area. The zoning really didn't align with that, so we changed the zoning district to match up with the comprehensive plan. So that's, essentially we want to do that writ large. So if there are areas, or I think the ultimate goal, as that move says, is to rewrite the zoning ordinance. So I'd say one of the big issues we've had with our zoning ordinance to date is that it wasn't really updated to align with our current comprehensive plan. So we want to address that very quickly after we adopt this plan. But one thing so we're focusing on creating sort of complete neighborhoods. That's one of the pieces of this plan. So complete neighborhoods is, it has more of a mix of, say, housing types and maybe, even small scale businesses mixed in with neighborhoods. So if that goes in the plan, if all of our future land uses have some mix of residential, some small scale businesses and things that are in there, well, our current zoning ordinance does not track with that at all. So we would really need to update, maybe make a new zoning ordinance that says, okay, here's our new zoning district, here's how it aligns with the future land uses in the plan. That's the goal.
Don't be shy, Lou.
Dustin, we also have, as we mentioned, other staff here. I don't know, the public doesn't know who's here, but we do have our grants manager, Braden, here, as well as Tim from our Public Works Department, if you want them to talk about how they would use the plan. The staff was very instrumental in coming up with the big moves and the little moves correspondingly, so that they could really be able to use this to help them in their day-to-day jobs. So they're available as well.
Okay.
So, I think we have a pretty fundamental problem with what a comp plan actually is. And from Carol's explanation of all the other plans that we use, a comp plan is focused, like those others, on a particular component of city actions. And the time frame and the image of long-term, unpredictable criteria and principles of physical development that may occur within 20 years, or may not occur for 50 years, or may never occur, that we still have to be prepared for, to avoid it happening too quickly without sufficient rehearsal to be prepared for how it's done. So the notion that there's a projection period and actions to be ticked off is appropriate at one extreme, for example, for the Mayor Council annual strategy plan, or for an organizational internal plan that's intended to prioritize budgets over 4 years, or a capital improvements plan which is resource constrained. A comp plan is about land development and infrastructure in the very long range. And it's not resource constrained because it's trying to be ahead of the possibility that resources become available, that the economy changes dramatically, and that we have principles and location ideas and legal backing for zoning to be prepared for that. So I think we have to somehow decouple part of what Imagine Urbana is trying to be in order to enable us to have a comp plan, which is, despite the name, not the city's overall organizational strategic plan. It's comprehensive in the sense that it includes all of the city and all of the things, not just the things we want to prioritize now or that we have the resources to act on, but that we have to be prepared to deal with in the very, very long run. So the things that are missing for the Land Development Infrastructure Plan Commission, LRTP, those kinds of activities somehow have to be able to be associated with this document, but they're not going to fit in the current structure of the document.
Can I make a comment about that? I actually have two comments that I want to make. One I'll make and then just put over here, is that in the way that Kevin was describing the way staff uses the document and relative to what you have seen, there's more that Kevin needs to show you and explain about, you know, the land use maps and so forth. That is a hole that actually there's at least a draft to fill. Now, to your point, Lou, about long range, here's where I'm going to differ with you, and here's an important departure, at least so far, in what you'll see in this plan, and that is, in the past, and it was played out in actions by staff in prior administrations. There was a heavy emphasis, and you can see this in Examiner-Urbana, that it did not serve us, a heavy emphasis on growth through annexation. And in a long, long range, that makes sense to figure out, well, what are we going to do on the fringes, right? But that's not what we expect to do in the next 20 years. We don't think that is, we can't afford it. It hasn't been effective, and that's not the focus. And so that makes that's important guidance for how we view what's inside Urbana now. It's important guidance for public works. It's important guidance for people who maybe are acquiring farmland thinking that the city's going to bring them sewer and streets and so forth. So I would say that's a very significant example of the difference that you and I have on that.
And think this through. One of the reasons it looked that way is in 2005, that's what was happening. And the city was dealing with those phenomena. Menards had bought a large parcel next to Walmart. They had proposed doing a massive residential development. Savannah Green had just happened. The southeast Urbana was developing. Myers was being developed. All of that was happening. And so at the time, that's what appeared salient. But the fact that it's not happening now doesn't mean that we don't have to have policies and expectations about how development will occur at our edges, because at some point, in some way, it's likely to occur. And if we don't want it to occur, or we want it to occur in a particular way, we have to say so. And the 2005 plan still says so. It says that if you're going to develop in certain places, then we want a certain kind of connectivity. That, for example, we don't have in Northeast Urbana now, with the subdivisions coming down from Olympian
Airport.
Airport Road.
Airport Road, yeah.
And we need a document that says, okay, we're going to do streets this way in principle. And we're going to be prepared, so when that little subdivision comes in with a proposal, we know whether we have the right-of-way, the positions to have connectivity of streets, that we don't end up with a bunch of dead ends. And we've been correcting this as we go along in the built-up areas, so it still matters. And I understand that we may want to say in a current plan that we're focused on infill, but the current document confounds infill and incremental and doesn't explain them. It's nowhere near specific enough about this kind of choices that we need to be prepared for. So it can be this sort of short-run, resource-constrained, action-oriented, organizational focus for the next 5 to 10 years. But that is not what a comprehensive plan needs to be able to provide. So yes, we need to work with Kevin and get the rest of it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't think this framework is going to work for that part. It's going to be more separate, perhaps, than is currently being imagined.
What I would say in response, and maybe we'll just have to see how it plays out, is that unlike the prior comprehensive plan that we basically let just be what it was, aside from one neighborhood plan that came out of it, it wasn't revisited. There wasn't reporting out on the progress towards the ideas that were reflected in it. And the idea here is that this will be revised every 5 years, and economic trends in in places that are highly desirable might occur very quickly. And I'm thinking about major cities with rapid growth. I don't see that happening here. So it's the responsibility of people who are sitting in the chairs as staff to say, as we see trends happening, we need to catch up, not attempt to capture all that now with the imperfect knowledge that we have, and some of the knowledge we have about today is that we will not be growing through annexation for the foreseeable future.
Okay, the key word you used is catch up. The whole point of a comp plan is not to have to catch up. It's to have prepared ahead of time so we have the frame to use to make the decisions, because we don't know when they're going to come up. And I think, as another example, and I haven't gone back to look at Examine Urbana again in the last week, but I need to. This focuses heavily on downtown. It focuses heavily on a particular notion of walkability. We didn't lose Health Alliance to somebody else's downtown with walkability. We didn't lose doctor's offices to somebody else's downtown with walkability and no annexation. So if we are so determined that we can't think beyond a short term, this is what's happening now, this is what we're dealing with, then we're not thinking the way a comp plan needs to think. One of my phrases is, we need to think centennially and act daily. That is this notion that there's a projection period, like in a CIP, which is related to a comp plan, but is a very different animal for particular reasons. And they're done by different people at different times on different time scales. And there's a reason for that. We can pretend to be unique, but there's a base rate. People have tried this before, okay?
Oh, Tim? Sure.
I like think centennially. That's what we need to do, and I think from my standpoint, I deal with infrastructure a lot. That's a big part of what we do. Infrastructure, environmental impacts, things like that. And we do need to think about growth outward. That's not a thing that's not possible, but we need to be realistic about it. If the comp plan says, we're prepared to do this thing and we're really not, that's an issue too, where we grow in a way that we can't sustain. We have people approach us about developments that quite frankly, it's not even in UCSD's sanitary sewer planning area. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars that if we build that and they don't come, we're sitting on it and the infrastructure is deteriorating underneath us and we don't get a use out of it. So I get your point. We do need to think about those things. We need to talk about, potentially reserving something like a gravity sewer, for instance. The best cost scenario is running things by gravity. So if the lay of the land is something that's limiting as a physical barrier for us, we need to be cognizant of that and think about trying to maybe do some kind of reserved easements or something with people for those long-term plans where they're present, but realistically, if someone wants to build on the outskirts of that, it's going to be a hard financial pill for the city to swallow if we're going to help try to incentivize those type of things. Conversely, we're also dealing with development up now. That is a limitation, which is a big focus of Urbana, of infill and growth and things like that. And the answer is the last 100 years, we really probably haven't been diligent enough about analyzing these infill developments based on the systems that we put in place to be able to handle those things. So there are some points within Imagine Urbana that talk about, you know, pursuing our infrastructure, you know, that's financially sustainable and environmentally compliant, and, you know, also building things and being cognizant of what we've got. You know, we've been doing a lot of that since I've been here. Carol talked about the pavement scanning. You know, we're trying to do that across the board with our infrastructure to get really a baseline of where we're at. And the answer is, you know, what we're seeing now is we have developments that have occurred over the years that potentially were bad buys for us in terms of we're paying the piper now for things that we just don't have money in the bank for. And, you know, a big thing that's happened in the last couple of years, we've overhauled the land development code. Very useful thing in terms of that is stop letting people do things that we can't sustain. You know, that's part of the Imagine Urbana stuff that we talk about is trying to get a broader scope of these things so that even when at surface value they look good, if they're not good, we want to be able to evaluate that fairly so that, you know, alternatively, when there are good things and we want to try to incentivize those things because they are long-term sustainable and things like that, you know, that is important. And, you know, I think we talk about a lot of things through here with the infrastructure things about, you know, we're taking that same approach as this asset management approach where we're trying to look holistically about the whole thing and, you know, not repeat potential mistakes that have happened in the past. You know, so I certainly understand, you know, be prepared for those things, have enough education to talk about those things so that when they come up, we can be real with developers about what is and isn't realistic for us, or what kind of lift it is, where it's like, you know, 90s, 2000s, it was booming. Everybody's building, everything's happening. You know, it's a great thing. Everybody's projecting the future. 2009 happens, boom, things stop going, people stop growing. You know, nobody foresaw that, but that's the reality. And now we're dealing with much more infill development that's creating these new problems of capacity issues and, you know, potentially we've got these infrastructures that we can't keep up with. So, you know, I see your point. I think that's logical. You know, for the most part, I would say because of the situation that we are in, you know, realistically with what we do have, it's going to be hard for us to support growing out, I think, at least from an infrastructure standpoint, because we've got other bad investments that have happened over the years where they weren't, you know, someone else paid for them the first time, but, you know, we needed them to build infrastructure that lasted 100 years because we can't afford to replace it, you know, on any other cycle. But we allowed them to build things that don't last that long. So just from an infrastructure standpoint, you know, I think we need to have awareness conceptually on our fringes and understand our limitations and barriers out there. But I think a lot of the focus, like you said in 2005, what was happening in 2005? We wrote the comp plan around the things that were happening. Today, infill development is kind of a thing that's happening. You look at a lot of development within our city, and some of it is starting to push the limits of what we have here to work with.
Thanks, Tim.
So I think what this says to me is we need the level of detail in principles and policies that would relate to infill. So sewer capacity and construction, as you pointed out, is about location, gravity, and density, or demand, which is, we'll use density for simplicity. And that matters in redevelopment or intensified development. And we've had problems and have had to do some reconstruction and expansion. That ought to be identified because that's what the Plan Commission needs to be aware of. So maybe before we had and needed to have the UCSD boundary agreement outlined in the plan. It's part of the documentation, the annotation of the future land use, because that's what developers, the Plan Commission, the people who come and talk to Kevin, we needed to have that evident and visible. So maybe we need some other kinds of things evident and visible, but the level of detail we need is not beware of infill or assess infrastructure capacity. It's tell us what the infrastructure capacity is and where it is, and if it's a problem or not a problem. And where are the opportunities for redevelopment?
Yeah, and that's, in some of the maps, you know, we've been working on those, and that was a thing we brought up recently, is getting like the UCSD boundary on there so that it's very visible, you know, that you can see, like, there are limitations for expansion with water service outside of these areas.
Right, so.
But I'd say, I mean, some of it is we haven't done that work yet, but Tim and his folks are working to do that over time. But we're not gonna, you know, we can't hold up, not saying that anybody's suggesting this, but we don't wanna hold up adopting this plan until we have that level of detail. So, you know, when we were drafting this, it was look at sewer capacity and things. We know we need to do that so that, you know, Tim already knows it, but it's in the plan then, once we adopt it, and so, you know, anybody can look at it and say, this is one of the things we need to do in the next several years. And then, so, I'd say one thing just about structure of the whole plan. So, one reason we went to this sort of online software hosting platform is so that we can, when we make changes to the plan over time, we can just, whatever plan you find online is going to be the current comprehensive plan. So Tim's folks do that type of analysis, that gets rolled into, you know, that can get rolled into our maps and rolled into the plan through, you know, through an amendment to the plan. Because right now, our plan has a bunch of amendments, and they're all over the place, and you can't really, there's no place to go to say, what is our current comprehensive plan? It's kind of like the law, you know, like what's the law? You have to go to all these different books. So we want to have it all in one place, online, and with our online maps as well, which I would love to share with you all, because we have a fresh draft of the online master map that I want to share with you. Can I share that with you all? Should I do that now?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that whether we want to jump to that, but I guess my concern is this is being talked about as a map, kind of as an afterthought. But the policies and moves and actions and statements in the imagined document, I don't agree with. So if we can't talk about them through the representation of the map and the content, then, I mean, we're sort of not on the same page, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
But-
but I think, let me say one, I think this is something that's been a problem for me as well. Like, you know, the plan talks about encouraging incremental development. What's the capacity for incremental development? Where is that gonna happen? What is it? I mean, maybe we don't have the best analysis that we can eventually end up with, but if we are going to say that we are prioritizing incremental development, we should know that we have the ability to absorb some incremental development in particular locations, and that absorbing that incremental development in those locations makes sense in terms of other priorities, right? Makes sense in terms of walkability, or in terms of, you know, providing housing at, you know, all incomes for people, like other things that are talked about in the plan. But there's just not a lot of specificity, right? So the vagueness of things was a comment that I noted throughout the plan, and a lot of that comes back to spatial analysis, the maps that don't exist to support these ideas. Anyone else want to jump in?
I guess my point was, I'm not sure it makes sense to jump to the maps, because at some level of detail, there's a whole set of policy questions and focus questions that if we're going to jump to the maps, we're you know, sort of wide open discussion.
But yeah,
It
I'm not,
has to occur at some point.
I'm not suggesting we get into a full-blown study session just about doing, looking around the whole city and getting into a mapping exercise right now. I think that's for a later date. I just wanted to, at some point tonight, I'm going to share with you the tool that we have been developing with our friends at the GIS Consortium. So you can kind of see, start thinking about what we can do going forward at future sessions.
So I have a question for Lou and Dustin and for our staff as well. Not every city will have a comprehensive plan. And when city opt to create a comprehensive plan, there's a history behind why they are doing that. And to your guys' knowledge, is there a shift in how we are approaching comprehensive plan? Because what I hear from city staff is that we want to make this way because we think this is the best way to serve our city, to make a living document. We can always provide update to it. It will always be up to date as new pieces comes available. It will be attached to it. And then to Lou's comment, I think Lou might have a very different idea of what comprehensive plan is and should be. So I don't have an answer, but I really just see Lou, with your 50 years of planning background, you might have a different idea with our city staff that want to do something that they think is the best for the city. So I don't know if our discussion has get on a point that we need to bring back that understanding together before we get into more detail.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a difference in whether or not it's a living document or how often it's updated. I think any comprehensive plan, ideally, people would love it if it was updated every 5 years. Usually it's a question of resources and not being able to do that. So the fact that it's, that you have a plan and it's updated every 5 years doesn't mean that it doesn't still have that long time horizon that it's looking at. So I don't see those two things as sort of incompatible. I think Lou's comment is more, or maybe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think his comment is more about whether or not the current plan has the content to be able to do the kind of work that we do, the kind of work that staff does, to send the appropriate signals that allow developers and landowners to make the kind of decisions about investments that they want to make. And it doesn't really matter if it's updated, in real time, or if it's updated every 5 years, the way that it's been talked about.
That's also, I understand that's not a key point. And then I also understand that what you just reiterate Lou's concern about all those detailed things that need to historically are in comprehensive plan. But I see the city staff is doing it in a different way. It's less like 100-year plan driven approach, more let's have some inspiration. Let's see what people wanted out of this. I think the word you use a lot is, does it feel authentic for our Urbana's residents? So if you are drawing a plan from that aspect, if that's the focus, it might not be like their top priority to do the things Lou just mentioned it should do. And then all those things that kind of more of a core part of comprehensive plan will be slowly added to this kind of visionary plan? I do not know, so.
Kind of what I'm hearing, but we need certain things in there. You know, if we adopt this, you know, in December and January, someone proposes a PUD in a particular neighborhood, we need things in that plan to be able to make a recommendation. on
That
this.
is a really good. So let's say if we adopt it as is now, someone come in with a PUD proposal, do we have enough information? Like I remember for all the cases, you always bring out, okay, this is what our 2005 comprehensive plan says. Use that as a way to help us to make decisions. But does this have that information?
And also, it's not just about helping us make a decision, it's about, this is the legal basis for zoning and changes to zoning, right? So this is how the courts have said that they will defer to, you know, cities exercising their police power and zoning and making zoning changes, right? They will defer to cities doing that if they are basing it on something historically that's been the comprehensive plan, right? That has provided the rational basis for these kinds of regulatory, you know, moves or changes to those regulations. So it's not just that it's something nice to have, right? This is something that keeps the city out of trouble, right? This is something that, it's not something that's necessarily, you know, required by state law, although I think there is language in the state, whatever, statutes that, you know, talk about when you do have a zoning ordinance that there should be, you know, there's a logic that should be in place, right? You should have a zoning ordinance that is based off of a comprehensive plan. So there's those kinds of things that I think Lou is referring to that aren't as apparent, regardless of the more expansive way that the city would like to use this to inform other, you know, agencies or other, not agencies, but other divisions or departments within the city.
Yeah, I
And then you
think
can respond.
Dustin really sums that up really well. When I was reading this, I just had the feeling of, I know what you guys trying to do, but is this a comprehensive plan? But here you go.
I think there's a lot there. So one thing that we've talked about internally, and one thing that I'm hearing here that we'll need to do is really sort of kick the tires on this plan from the perspective of sort of, in my mind, we'd use these different end users for the plan, and then have to kind of run the plan through its paces before we're comfortable adopting it. Because if it doesn't serve the needs of these different user groups, then what good is it? So we'll figure out how we want to structure that and go forward, but I think that's a good, that's a good test. Test it out before you buy it.
Mr. Fell.
I was just going to say, from my standpoint, usually from sitting on the other side of this table, what gets me in trouble with the comprehensive plan is, and I see an issue here, and I think Lou is kind of speaking to this, is there are quality items in the comprehensive plan, and my dealings with the comprehensive plan and the way I have to use it are not quality items. They're definable, measurable things in the comprehensive plan. And there are a lot of, a goal is fine, but a developer's perception of the goal the city wants may not be the same as the city's, and the developer believes he's presenting the city with the goal they want, and he's not. So things in the comprehensive plan that are opinions are a problem on the developer side, in my opinion. The other thing that happens with the comprehensive plan we have now is that it's out of date enough that developers come to people they need to help them do development, And one of the things that we do is look at first at the zoning ordinance of what they want to do. Is it applicable in the zoning ordinance? And if it's not, or if it's fringy, we go to the comprehensive plan. And many, many times, not recently, when we try to use the comprehensive plan to back a decision, it not really valid anymore, because it's out of date enough that something that in 2005 was mid-rise development, or however it was, is not that now. But a developer in Florida thinks it is. And those are the issues. So it's, to me, on my side of this, on that side, it's very important that the plan stays up to date and the zoning ordinance matches the plan.
Yeah, I
And
think that's key.
And when someone comes, especially for a PUD, in the zoning ordinance, I mean, it's not necessarily a comprehensive plan issue, but in the zoning ordinance, there are goals to be met for a PUD. And it's kind of the same issue in the comprehensive plans. The goals to be met aren't the same for everyone. We need measurable items to act on from the architect side of the issue.
Yeah. So I think what Ms. Mitten referred to as, having been a lot of input, to create a sense of authenticity, right, and responding to what the community, the broad stakeholders in the community would like to see in the plan. That's what needs to go into updating these things that were in the 2005 plan that we're not seeing, right? So some of that might be in goals and objectives, which are big ideas and maybe big moves. I'm not sure if they correspond exactly. But we also need things like this, right? We need these future land use descriptions that go along with the future land uses, so that when the developer comes, to do a PUD, they can not just see what are, the goals or the requirements of the PUD ordinance and the zoning ordinance, but they can look at the future land use, right, descriptions, and what hopefully incorporates the community's desires, aspirations for particular parts of the city, how that's reflected in characteristics that would describe development in those neighborhoods, right? That, I guess, sounds like this is something that's being worked on, maybe, or, because there wasn't, what I saw so far, that didn't exist. And even on the future land use plan, there wasn't nearly enough nuance in the
descriptions?
land use categories, yeah. There was a residential land use category. That
Yeah,
doesn't
I
get
mean,
us very
that's
far.
by design. I mean, we're trying to pare it down. It seemed like perhaps we were getting a little too fine-grained, maybe, in our existing future land uses. It's possible we've gotten too less fine-grained with the current ones, but
Yeah.
that's why we have these sessions.
Well, I mean, we have different neighborhoods and we have different development types in those neighborhoods, and we have, we've heard different willingness to accept, changes to those development types. Not that, people don't want any change, but they've described the kind of change that they want, I think, in the kind of input that we've received. So I think we need, some more nuance. I think maybe, yeah, we can, talk about how much more nuance we need versus it getting overly complicated, but I think we need more than we have currently. And Lou kind of hinted at this in terms of, walkability, because I think walkability is one of the big ideas or the big moves, right? That, walkability looks very different in different development types, right? In different locations around the city. In some cases, walkability in a place might be, walking for recreation, right? So are there sidewalks, right? Are the streets configured in a certain way? Is there street lighting? In other places, walkability is about having something to walk to, which is not necessarily a characteristic of, the individual neighborhood so much as its, adjacency to downtown or some other corridor, right, that has things to walk to. So we need more nuance, right, to be able to say where these things apply and what they look like when they apply to those places. And we need this to be something that, you know, when it comes to, where did I put my postcard? Did I put that away? When we start sharing this with the public, right, this is the kind of information that we need to have so that the public has something to comment on, right? Because if we're saying that, you know, your particular neighborhood or your particular commercial corridor that you frequent or that you're adjacent to might change in XYZ ways, they have more buy-in or they have more of a stake, more of an interest to provide some comment on that, as opposed to saying, we want to make everything more walkable. Well, great, but what does that mean, right? Does that mean that you're going to build an apartment building, you know, on my block? Does it mean that you're going to put in sidewalks? Does it mean that you're going to, you know, make my street, you know, 2 lanes instead of 4 lanes, right? I think those kinds of ideas need to be a little bit more fleshed out.
Okay.
Rose.
I've been benefiting greatly from this discussion. And here's my takeaway, and I request your criticism of my understanding of this discussion as it has gone so far. But I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the first speaker.
Carol?
Carol. One of the things that you said is that it tells the story of who we are today. And I brought with me the zoning ordinance of the city of Urbana. And I asked, what story does this tell of Urbana, Illinois? And it doesn't tell a story. It's a legal document with a formal structure that serves a distinct purpose, and it is the first go-to for a developer. Second would be the comprehensive plan. But in the comprehensive plan, I get the feel that there are promotional elements. There are no promotional elements in this. And I'm not saying that we're advertising, we're trying to be charming or anything like that. But there's sort of a pitch that says, by golly, we will be walkable. We will have when what we were discussing here in the sort of second layer of the 2005 comprehensive plan is that from the original structure, there's sort of a second layer, and in that, one would look and see, are we walkable here or not? In other words, it arises from the formal, specific task of a comprehensive plan. I mean, I picture the comprehensive plan being this dry and this hard to sell to anyone. And we're not trying to do that, but I get the point, if I'm reading your comments correctly, that there's a formal structure, legal, and important that is anything but telling a story. Instead, it's providing a structure for decision-making. Do I understand correctly?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I want a piece of it when I get.
Well, I mean, you can go first if you want to, but
That'll give you a chance to correct me. Should you find I need correcting. So let me say it this way. Let me boil it down, and then I think maybe I can get Lou to agree with some broad statements that I'm making. Okay, when I talked about it's a reflection of who we are today, that's Examine Urbana. That's the assessment. The comprehensive plan, to me, is an expression of who do we aspire to be over a time frame. Lou and I are going to differ about that. But it's not fantasy, right? It's grounded in reality. And so, and that's the element that we want to bring to this about implementability, right? Implementation, being realistic about that. And so I do think it is a story. It's maybe not, it's not a traditional narrative story, but I think some of what, just on the point of the future land use descriptions as for an example, there aren't any graphics. So this is a picture book of our aspirations too. And it's supposed to be accessible to a wide audience of people. The zoning ordinance, because it is a legal document, because it represents us exercising our police power, just like the boring city code, that's why it looks the way it does. The comprehensive plan is a policy underpinning to the zoning ordinance. Okay.
Thank you.
So my reaction is, a comp plan should start with a story. And part of my, at another level of detailed critique of editing, is there's at some part, it doesn't matter right now, there's a bunch of statements about the city will. And my difficulty with it is it's actually two different things. Part of it is the city will be walkable, okay? But another part of it is the city will develop a housing plan. Now that's actually two different things. One is the city as a institutional entity will do something. The other is, in the future, the city we imagine will be like this, okay? So the way I view this is the first part of the plan should be that story. Aspiration, this is what will be. And it's aspirational, which is not the same as realistic.
I think that's the key term.
Right,
in this
so
discussion.
aspirational is not the same as realistic. In fact, they mean almost the opposite. Not quite, but aspirational is driving me beyond the realistic. The realistic is, let's be realistic. The aspirational is listening to some political speeches recently, which some of you might have heard some of the same ones I have. So we need to have that part of the plan. But then from that story, we need to rehearse in front of the public the details of what that story means. So when we say the city will be walkable and we will have mixed-use zoning categories, think about it this way. In your neighborhood, that might look like this because. And then when the developer comes along and says, okay, Urbana doesn't want to be like Champaign, they're different, okay? And we can talk about the ways we're different. I alluded to some of them earlier. So I get that. And now they're saying that in order to do that, they want to have new zoning categories, mixed-use categories. So here's, as Dustin was saying, what do they mean by mixed-use categories? What does it look like in this kind of neighborhood? What does it look like in a high-density neighborhood where the buildings are 10 stories tall? What does it look like in a neighborhood that's single families and duplexes? What does it look like? And boy, when you tell me that, I'll come to your meeting and tell you whether I agree with you or not. And once we put anything out like that, we will be rehearsing with our various neighborhoods, which are very different from each other. And we will be learning, who's really good at protecting their neighborhood, and we know who that is, and who needs a lot more help, and why focusing on downtown leaves out most of East Urbana. And so we haven't done that, and that's what we need to do. So when I said no, telling the story is a great way to start. And I have some problems with the story being told.
And that's what we need before this, right? So we need this kind of information for people to be able to provide input on, right? I don't think it's not going to be useful to go and tell people we want the city to be walkable, because who's going to disagree with that, right? Okay.
The point is, nobody knows what it means.
Well, yes, that's the point, yeah. Yeah, because no one knows what it means as a term, right? Part of the issue is that there's too much jargony kind of language in here that the average person isn't going to really know how to interpret. That's one issue. The other issue is that people don't know what this means in their specific neighborhood, on their block, or in a place that they frequent. And if everyone just says, yeah, that's great, and we adopt this plan, and then, you know, a year from now, a developer comes and says, well, I want to put, you know, this apartment building that is, you know, really massive and goes out to the you know, the street and whatever, and says, and the reason I want to do this is because it's going to improve walkability. We aren't going to have anything really to go on to be able to assess or push back or, you know, respond to that, but we're going to have people come, right, to our meeting and give their opinion, and that's something that we could have better dealt with in the process of making this plan before we got to that point, right? So the plan should be a way to incorporate that so that we can use the plan and we can still, you know, get public input from places and people, you know, places where neighborhood development is happening, and from people that are being impacted by it. But we should have some sense of what the community as a whole thought about these ideas, right, at this point in time. And hopefully, you know, it's updated every 5 years or whatever. That'd be great to have, you know, a little bit of an update on what people's sense of these things are on a more frequent basis than, you know, 2005 to 2025, right? But again, we just don't have that specificity, and very quickly, right, we're going to be sharing this with the community and expecting them to provide some feedback on these things that I'm just skeptical about how useful it's going to be. Trying to suggest some tasks for staff to work on and for us to help with.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like tasks.
Yeah. And maybe that's where we're at. I mean, we're an hour, or when did we start? We're an hour and a half into this. And I don't want to just feel like we're getting to the point where we're just repeating the same thing over and over again, or at least I am, and maybe Lou is. So maybe we can think about some tasks or some direction for staff to try and address some of these issues that we're highlighting. Their ideas.
Can I?
Yeah.
So there's, to me, there's two big things that we could tackle next. One is we're hearing that you are not pleased, or at least some of you are not pleased with the lack of nuance that we have in the future land use descriptions, designations. We have too few categories, and you'd like to see that fleshed out more. That's one thing that you could assign to us, and that is something that we could work on. That is something that I don't think you've actually even seen the full draft because of the map issue that Kevin was talking about earlier. So that's sort of a chunk, and it's an important chunk because that's really where the zoning ordinance hangs on. But
Not just those land use categories, but how do some of these ideas translate into development types, right? So what does incremental development mean in, you know, the neighborhood adjacent to downtown, right? What does incremental development mean in East Urbana? What does incremental development mean in South Urbana, right? Same thing, walkability. What does walkability mean in general, all right? And then what does it mean specifically in some of these places, right? Because these are the kinds of idea, and the same with, you know, housing needs, right? Some of these other things, there are overarching goals, or to me, more like themes that should run through and show up in what we are suggesting are the ways that particular places in the city could change, or should change, or might change, right? Or shouldn't change, so that we can achieve these things that we have heard from the community are important, right?
Yes. So I'm trying to chunk it, so
Yep.
that might be another, that might be a
Well, they're
chunk that
connected.
comes-
They're connected is what I'm saying.
Oh,
so,
totally.
yeah.
They're totally, but this is an elephant that we're trying to tackle.
Right.
So there's something that you just pointed out, which is some of the concepts are too vague and they're not contextualized. So that's another broad criticism. And then there was the issue about that Lou raised, I don't know if other people share it, where like he doesn't even agree with some of the basic overarching things, big ideas and so forth. So I'm just trying to, like, I don't think it's useful to give us everything and say, I think we need to chunk it out and see what's sort of like really basic that you have issues with, and then we'll tackle that and go from there.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's why I wanted to kind of structure this so that we don't just like dogpile on, you know, everything. But the concern is that just a couple weeks from now, you're presenting something to the public, right? So we need to think about not just how we chunk it, but how we chunk it in a time frame that allows this to proceed, right, in a meaningful way, I think.
If it can. I mean, if the sentiment of the Plan Commission, I know Andrea's gonna poke me with something, but if the sentiment of the Plan Commission is that taking what we have now to the public is a useless exercise, then we will regroup.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'd say there's work to be done, and we're ready to
and
help.
we recognize it.
And we're ready to help with that in the next 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, right?
Okay.
I think it would be, to me at least, I'm not speaking for the commission, but to me at least, it would be bad form to have put this out there and gone through the effort of, and the expense of notifying people about these things, and then to go back on it, so.
I think there's useful information to share, but I want to get the feedback from you, and if you can help us, give us feedback that we can, for work that we can accomplish in the next couple of weeks to make that interaction with the public more meaningful, we're prepared to do the work.
We are too.
So let's think of it in exactly that way. The way I envision these neighborhood meetings is there's going to be a table, roughly like the one you're sitting at, and there are going to be 4 easels. I mean, interact, tell me, no, that's not what we're thinking. And on those 4 easels, there's going to be the best we can do of a future Urbana map. And I don't want to call it a land use map, and Kevin and I can deal with the details of this. And I have some ideas about how to create it. And Kevin and I have already been talking. On one of them, on one of those panels is something like the big ideas and the big moves. And at this point, I think we go with them, even though I am concerned both about the structure of them and the content of some of them. But that, putting that out there is the way to have that discussion in the neighborhoods. Okay, and I don't think we have time to create something else. So that's another one of these panels. If we can create or find, which I think is the answer, not create, find and legally use, examples of the kinds of development types that we are imagining that don't currently exist in Urbana. In other words, if we're going to talk about mixed-use neighborhoods in multiple kinds of neighborhoods, which we basically do not have, with a couple of exceptions in Urbana, we need to think about how to describe those to people. So I can imagine what a few of them look like and how Huna reacts, how Suna reacts, and how Northeast Urbana reacts. I mean, I've been through this before, okay? Maybe that's part of why I could imagine these things. So I think we can find some, and what that will prompt is one of the most difficult to practice or rehearse in front of our publics is this notion, because that's one of the biggest changes at the what's happening in my backyard, things that I've seen anyway, proposed in here that actually creates controversy. I mean, there's some other things, but, and I'm not sure what goes on the fourth panel yet, but I think there's a fourth panel, okay? So my view is, I think Kevin, with some help, can create the map panel. And we want 2 copies of it, one on the panel and one on the table. Because it's much easier to talk to a group of people on a map on a table than it is a map on an easel. And we probably want that for the development types too. And the development types should be on separate paper so we can manipulate them. You don't want everybody crowding around the same one. And, you know, the posters, presumably you've got capabilities to create posters. And for the others, you've got the content, so you know what goes on them. So, I mean, that's what I see to do before that. And it doesn't actually involve creating new ideas between now and then, or discussing or even deliberating about those ideas between now and then. But it comes up with representations with which to deliberate, which will be useful both to us as well as, I think, the neighborhood groups. And I think it's doable in 2 weeks with some help from students.
Yeah, I agree.
Lou,
So
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I agree with all those ideas. Those were some of the things that, you know, the 3 of us had talked about as well. And also, we're getting feedback from the public already on the plan itself. So I think we can have answers to those questions too at the meetings from the different questions that we've gotten.
From other than staff and plan
Yeah,
commissioners?
yeah, we've had public response to the online version, so they've made comments just like the Plan Commission did. They've made their comments as well. So we're starting to get those come in. I think right now, just to full disclosure, we've gotten 8 different people that have responded with comments, but you know, we can look into those, make sure we have answers at the meetings for those questions too.
So, language here. Answers? Wait,
Well, some of them are as simple as that. It's an answer. They just need clarification. Other ones are thoughts that, you know, we need
yeah,
to explore.
okay,
Yes,
'cause
thank you for
I
making
think
that
there's
clarification.
2 different notions of how we respond.
Correct.
We don't assume we have the answers necessarily.
I share the notion that the key to public involvement hinges on having a map. in front of one. That's what I miss. I'll learn as much from a map as from everything else. I'm just wondering if staff has in mind what level of change from 2005 might be presented in map form to the public when the time comes. That seems to me to be the burden. We could put the 2005 maps out and describe in words what changes might be, and that would be a start, but I would expect something more.
Sure, yeah. I actually have a couple of printed draft maps here that are pretty large that folks can look at. Also, we've got the online map. And as we were going through and sort of mapping these future land uses onto this map, or creating the new layer, I did track areas where we're suggesting a change. So if before it said this is supposed to be light industrial and it's going to business, I've clearly identified that, not on these printed maps, but I have that layer, and that would be useful for those public meetings. And then, I mean, I think as you all have we've talked about a little bit, we have pared down the future land uses. And that was, I mean, it was by design to simplify things, but also we kind of started with this concept that other than a few sort of very specific types of land use, like say green spaces or like institutional, like large institutions like the university, most of the land uses are some type of neighborhood, and every type of neighborhood can have a certain intensity of development. And we were kind of starting from a position that it's okay, and actually it is okay right now. You can have businesses in your home anywhere in Urbana. So right now in Urbana, you can have some businesses everywhere. So, but it was kind of a continuum of intensity of business versus residential uses versus sort of other types of uses. So when we kind of pared down these future land uses, it was with this idea that there's a continuum of intensity, but that some level of, residential and business would be allowable in most areas of the city. I think I might have gone a bit on a tangent there, but yeah. I wanted to get that out there so you all kind of know where we're coming from on those things.
Yeah, but I think you've also gotten right at the problem. And that is, I think I caught somebody else doing this too. On your map that you put up there, we look at our own neighborhoods. And we're saying, well, you can describe that as the same, a kind of neighborhood where this is going, but those two neighborhoods are completely different. The way that looks on the ground, the way it feels to me next door, very, very different. They're different neighborhood types, and we need to acknowledge that. The 2005 plan acknowledges that. Some of those things are very deeply embedded after long, long deliberations. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be different now, but they make a big difference to the people in those neighborhoods. So lumping them all like this,
well, I mean,
not going to tell us what we need to know.
But I think what we'd be getting at in the future is when you rewrite the zoning ordinance, that's when you are able to get into those nuances of the particular form of a neighborhood.
No, but what we're trying to say is, look, we recognize this neighborhood in Urbana.
Mm-hmm.
We've been developing this neighborhood, nurturing it in a particular way for 100 years. And you don't have to pretend which neighborhood I'm talking about. We are not going to be treated like every other neighborhood. Okay? And neither are we in another neighborhood. And so the way that discussion has to happen, if we're gonna be able to do anything as a plan commission without having 100 people in the audience screaming at us, is to acknowledge and do some of that rehearsal now as part of the comp plan, so that we are prepared to deal with those things. And, okay, we want to make some changes. We want to have this idea, apparently, of more mixed use. But we got to work on that hard now, not pretend to save it for later.
I do feel compelled to say at this point that as we work through what is an appropriate distinction among neighborhoods that is relevant to the level of the comp plan, that we are mindful of the values that are reflected for the whole city of Urbana, and that no neighborhood gets to adopt its own set of values, that it must reflect the overall, because some of the things in other places, other cities, I'm not even going to suggest that it's in Urbana, so I won't hopefully get into too much trouble. They're seated in things that are not appropriate and that violate our values. And so I just want that to be on the table as we listen to what comes forward.
I think that's true. Let me just one comment. But you know, we can have a value for the city as a whole that we want development that's financially resilient, right? So we just went through a process of changing what's it?
CMU.
CMU, and we had this discussion of, did we want to allow, what were we talking about, like 18-story buildings? What was
No, it was 10. It was a difference between 7 and 10.
Okay, so do we want to allow 10-story buildings, or do we want to allow, or do we want to limit it to a height that's more contextual with the surrounding area? So that's what we're talking about, right? So the value, okay, point made. Yeah. Okay, so do you feel like, I feel like we've communicated enough to give you a sense of the kinds of tasks.
Right, definitely to give us marching orders for the next couple of weeks, so that's good.
Kevin, just one more thing. Like, I'm looking through the 2005 comprehensive plan. Section 5 and 6 is what we wanted to be in front of us to make us more comfortable, so we can feel like we know what we're doing.
Sorry, you were saying something, Kevin?
Sorry to stop you.
I was just going to make a joke that it took us close to 2 hours to get to my.
For our agenda. Because
Sure,
when
yeah.
When we talked about how to structure this study session, the intent was to kind of chunk so that, we didn't really spend any time.
You think, and if that takes a short amount of time, then we could have other time to general comments and things as well.
Okay.
So there's a couple things. There's some layers in here. There we go. Okay, so it's got your just legend and all that stuff. So it does include some of implementation of that plan. So to Carol's point from earlier, we've been really implementing plans. Like that's what we've been doing during Mayor Marlin's tenure. And then future land uses. So you see all the categories here. I think if you just click on an area, you should be able to, well, that's tax parcel, let me see. So I'm just gonna turn off tax parcels. So, okay, future land use. So if you click on here, it'll tell you the future land use. It'll give you the description that we have. These, are still the draft descriptions, but they can change over time. One thing that I asked Nicole to add was just a pretty basic commenting thing. So there are comments you can make up here. So right now it's just future development, general, sort of general comments or transportation. So you just go up here, you can say like this and be like, so my suggestion is to run the KRT to Champaign,
Kickapoo River Trail.
rail trail. Yeah. See, I'm using jargon, but I know the planners will understand it. Okay, so you can save that. So now that's on the map. I think if you click on it, you can see the suggestion. So that's kind of a nice little thing. Or, future development, right here, we could say, whoops, whatever. You see how it works. That's supposed to be a rectangle. And I'm going to say, whoops, expand Bake Lab. So there you go. And I'll probably go in and delete those later. But that's how it goes. We'll scroll around, look at stuff. I'm guessing that, Lou, you'll probably make a comment that we should add some arrow comments so we can draw future connections or something. But yeah, if you have suggestions to make this map better or more usable, let me know. I can have Nicole make those changes. I think so. Yeah, and I think once comments are on here, anybody should be able to click on them and see what they look like. I don't have the ability to delete anybody's comments, so that's good because I'm just viewing this as a member of the public.
I'm a little confused.
Yes.
Are you imagining giving this to the public to make comments on the map?
I am, yeah.
Okay, but I think what we need first is versions of the information for them to see. So I think I know what goes on the fourth easel,
Okay.
which is it's going to take at least 2 printed maps, as you have pointed out, to be able to display enough of these different layers on the same map. And it's going to take some design work to make them visible and readable. And there's I'm skeptical that this is the mechanism for interaction that's going to be useful. My guess is it's going to be a lot easier for people to make their comments on Post-its and
Yeah.
put them on a paper map. Because as you've already demonstrated, it's actually a little tricky. And I know some people who aren't quite as skilled as you are at dealing with the GIS. So I think the way the focus here should be using this as the tool to
Yeah.
create the maps that we want to have for display. And I don't think I would even necessarily make it available, though you could have it along and see what,
Yeah, I mean,
you might use it in real time yourself, but having other people
Yeah.
comment on it, I think is problematic.
well, so I think what we've sort of done at every stage of engagement throughout this process is we've given people options to submit comments the old-fashioned way, so whether that be in person, marking on stuff, but also we've had online components, so you capture different audiences from
Yeah,
that.
I was
So-
thinking of at these meetings.
Yeah, no, at these meetings, it'll be all in front of people. Yeah, feel free to, I can unfurl those and you can give me comments on those larger maps that I put together as well.
But your point earlier, though, I think there's going to be at least 2, maybe even 3 different paper maps to get the kind of information we want to get on those maps.
There can be.
Before the meetings.
If I can do it in one map that's legible, I will do it in one map that's legible. But we'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
Yeah, well, without a magnifying glass.
Yeah. You got to remember that.
They're big. They're
Yeah.
36 by 48. All right. But I think we're good. I just wanted to share that. I'll share the link if you're the type of person that wants to pan around and add comments. Please do.
But we can also do the layers. Or no?
You can, I mean, you can turn layers on and off and stuff, but you're not going to be able to directly edit any layers if that's what you're asking.
No.
Okay.
Can you just turn on the walking layer? Well, it is
Yeah.
on, but
Yeah, let me just turn off everything else. Yeah, see, so like, it's very hard to see up here, but this little line here.
Right.
And I don't think there's a pop-up on that yet, so if we want to make it where we can have pop-ups, also there's, so I had talked to Nicole about possibly doing pop-ups, so we can do that if need be, if somebody wanted to see what that
so
plan is.
from more experience than I want to admit to, I have a hunch that we want to create these ahead of time and not rely for the meetings on pop-ups and other things, because it turns out it's just takes a lot of time to scroll around and find them and pop them up and look at them,
Yeah,
which is why the maps in the 2005 plan are split up into 10 or 15 pages and 3 or 4 different kinds of maps.
all right. But yeah, if you check this out, if you have any comments, send them my way. And I'll get them addressed.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Before our member of the public leaves, did you get inspired to provide any comments? No is fine.
Is this on? Hi. Hi, my name is Annie Feldmeyer Adams. I've lived in Urbana, almost 10 years now. I serve on the Bike Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I do something called the Urbana Amble Front Yard Garden and Art Tour. I've been around. I live in the neighborhood that folks don't want to mention, Woona. So I'm on the Woona listserv. I see a lot of the emails that go out. I have lived in a lot of cities. I am for dense, walkable, bikeable neighborhoods where there are businesses, where people can build an ADU, where people can do what they need to get done. And so I did notice in this plan, I know a lot of you want more details in the plan, and I don't sit on your side of the table, so I can't 100% speak to this, but I can say that I have heard from living here for many years, people are, it's hard to develop. It's hard to put things in. I know in my neighborhood, things get scuttled, and that is a place that really desperately needs development. We have rotting sororities and fraternities. So that would just be my one thought. My other thought is, I actually think it's a great plan. I think it's really exciting. I actually read the entire plan throughout the meeting, which is kind of amazing. So I'm really impressed. I'm really grateful for all the work everyone put into it. And my only thought would be, one thing that I notice is people will say, not in my backyard, but then there, on the other hand, I see in Woona, where am I gonna live if I wanna stay in Urbana as I age? And so, if you notice at the beginning of the plan, we have a lot of 25-year-olds and we have a lot of over 60. So if folks want to stay in Urbana as they age, that's definitely going to be a question, and that's not going to be large single-family homes. And I'm watching my parents in their 90s age, and I'm bragging up Urbana, and they don't live here, but I'm like, I can take a bus to the hospital. I have access to ways to get around. And I am looking at, the apartment buildings at the end of my block, and I'm like, yep, I could buy one of those little one bedrooms as I age and get out of my massive house. So I just think that's something to think about, Kevin. That was like going to be my one suggestion for the boards is like, not only like the maps. I know people like maps. I'm not a super map fan. I mean, I know they're important. But also just kind of thinking like, how do you want to live in this city as you age? Because it might open up people's ideas. Because I do see on the Woona listserv, like, why is there no rental units? Why is there no place for me to buy a house? Why can't I live here as I age? And I'm like, well, because for years you've been fighting all of that. I don't know what else to tell you. Why can't I go get dinner 3 blocks from my house? I'm like, because you keep complaining that we need to go in other places. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And I appreciate all of you for listening, because I know it's the end of the meeting and we're all exhausted and would probably like to go home and see something interesting on TV that's happening right now. So thank you all.
Thanks.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to say that. All right. Are there any other comments? Anything else that anyone wants to talk about? Mr. Rose?
About our future meetings, who will give some structure? Are we going to try to impose more structure on our development as we get further and further, or will study groups like this continue?
Are you saying this was unstructured, or? We tried to impose some structure on this, but
yes.
yeah, I mean, I would hope that it's a conversation between me and staff that comes up with how we'd like to structure these, yeah.
Okay. And is this?
Well,
what we
eventually, these will not be study sessions, they will be public hearings.
Correct.
So, I don't know, that's another discussion we need to have, how many more study sessions do we have? When do these transition to public hearings? But
Is there a legal difference between a study session and a public hearing? Is there? Okay.
Yes. I'll articulate the head nods that I see going on. Yes.
all right, any other questions, comments? Where my agenda is in here.
I have
oh.
one comment. I just feel like with the new technology, we are trying to do things differently, and then I feel like I'm still adapting to the newer technology. I don't know if you guys feel the same. I haven't learned to use it. I haven't been trained to use this newer technology.
Yes, this is actually a major issue. Some of you know that I've spent, say, the last 5 to 10 years trying to create online ways to handle, access, and manage plans. We've developed a system here. We developed a system in Maryland. I know of one in Texas. None of them actually get used. And I know Kevin, Dustin, and I all requested a hard copy of Imagine Urbana and worked initially from a hard copy. And that's part of why I'm saying some of the things I said earlier about how we imagine this technology is, it seems like it ought to work that way, but so far it's not.
Well, that might be something to ask the public, as well, at some point.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of, like many things, people have different preferences, right? So some people might prefer the online version. But the thing is that having it hosted online, whenever the plan gets updated, we could easily kick out a PDF static version of that for people who want it in printoutable form. I feel like I'm making up a lot of words lately, but yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like having finally figured out how to use word processing. You know, it may still create documents in the end, but they're a whole lot easier to manage and correct and update and share. And so that part of it's imagining it all actually happening and being used.
Well, we'll leave it at it's a work in progress. So, but it's the future. Okay, and with that, we are adjourned.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.